In a remote stretch of highway in West Texas, where the endless horizon meets the burning sky, and the quiet is broken only by the rustle of wind over barren fields, a solitary gas station stood as a beacon of both necessity and isolation. The establishment, known to locals simply as the Last Stop, had served travelers and residents for decades. Its flickering neon sign, weathered by sun and sand, announced discounted fuel and a small convenience store stocked with life's basic needs. Most days passed without incident. Shoppers picked up cold sodas, a few weary truck drivers filled up their tanks and exchanged nods with the attendant, and the station's old clock ticked steadily toward closing time. But on one searing summer night, under an oppressive sky, and with the desert heat clinging stubbornly to every surface, an event unfolded that would shatter the fragile peace of the small town of Cedar Grove. It began with a routine closing. The station's lone attendant, Ramon Alvarez, was tidying up the forecourt as he did every night. He locked the pump doors and dimmed the harsh fluorescent lights inside the store. As he walked along the cracked pavement to check on the storage shed at the rear of the property, a building that housed extra supplies and an aging generator, Ramon paused. There, under the sputtering glow of a single malfunctioning security light, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A body lay slumped against the metal door of the shed, partially hidden by a discarded cardboard box. The figure was a man, dressed in a stained white t-shirt and jeans, and his face was contorted in a final grimace of shock. Next to the man, barely visible in the dim light, was a scrap of paper on which had been scrawled one chilling sentence: "No one escapes the past." Ramon's hand trembled as he fumbled for his cell phone. The sound of his panicked voice, reporting the discovery, echoed in the empty lot. Within minutes, the steady hum of distant police radios intermingled with the soft clatter of footsteps as uniformed officers arrived. Detective Evelyn Cortez, a veteran of the state police known for her measured determination and keen observational skills, took command of the scene. The area was cordoned off with crime scene tape that fluttered in the warm desert breeze. As she crouched beside the body, Evelyn took note of every detail: the calm precision with which the body had been positioned, the lack of any signs of a frantic struggle nearby, and the solitary note clenched in the victim's lifeless hand. The absence of disturbance in the immediate vicinity suggested that the act had been planned rather than spontaneous. Preliminary identification revealed the victim to be Marcus "Mark" Henderson, a 33-year-old local journalist known for his dogged pursuit of stories that exposed long-buried truths about the town's shadowy undercurrents. Marcus had worked for a small regional newspaper, his bylines frequently appearing on local investigative pieces that questioned official narratives and uncovered corruption. Those who knew him recalled his relentless determination and his unwavering moral compass, qualities that had earned him both admiration and animosity in equal measure. Over the following hours, Detective Cortez began a series of interviews with those who had been present at the Last Stop that night. Ramon Alvarez, still visibly shaken, recounted his discovery. "I just finished closing up, like I do every night," he stammered, "when I saw something move by the storage shed. I thought maybe it was a stray animal, but then I saw the body. I didn't know what to do." His voice, thick with disbelief, betrayed the terror of witnessing something he never imagined would occur in his familiar workplace. A local truck driver, Jerome Whitaker, who had recently filled up his rig at the pump, remembered noticing an unfamiliar car idling near the station. "I'd seen a dark sedan parked in the lot a few times before, but that night it was different, like it was waiting for something," he said. Jerome added that the sedan's engine had been running even after the station's doors had closed. Though he couldn't provide a name or a clear description, his testimony hinted at a presence that did not belong to the usual cast of characters frequenting the Last Stop. In parallel, Detective Cortez's team meticulously combed the scene for evidence. Forensic technicians photographed the body from multiple angles, collected latent prints from the scrap of paper, and dusted the surrounding area for trace evidence. On the smooth, sun-bleached concrete, they found small, almost imperceptible flecks of soil that did not match the natural grit of the parking lot. A closer analysis suggested that these particles might have come from a specific area of the nearby desert, a clue that hinted at a premeditated path, or perhaps a deliberate staging of the scene. Back at the station, in the small break room where employees had huddled in whispered conversations after the discovery, Detective Cortez reviewed the information gathered from Marcus Henderson's personal effects. In his modest apartment, located in an unassuming complex on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, neighbors described him as a quiet man with an unyielding dedication to his work. According to his sister, Anita Henderson, Marcus had been increasingly concerned about local rumors of historical cover-ups involving prominent families in town. He was investigating something that went deeper than just bad business practices, Anita recalled softly. He thought there was a dark secret in our town's history, one that someone powerful was desperate to keep hidden. Her words resonated with the detective, who noted that the scrap of paper left with Marcus's body could very well have been his final attempt to communicate a warning, a message meant for someone who would piece together the truth. Over the next several days, Detective Cortez and her team began to reconstruct Marcus's investigative trail. They obtained copies of his published articles, his personal notebooks, and even the call logs from his cell phone. His work had focused on a series of unsolved disappearances from the 1980s in Cedar Grove, a series of cases that had long been dismissed as isolated incidents or attributed to chance. Marcus had, however, found connections that suggested these events were linked by a common thread, a powerful local family known as the Delgados, whose influence in Cedar Grove stretched back generations. According to his notes, several of the missing individuals had ties to this family, and Marcus had speculated that there might have been a cover-up, a deliberate effort to erase certain chapters of the town's history. The investigation took on a chilling new dimension when digital forensic experts recovered deleted files from Marcus's laptop. Among the fragments was an unfinished email addressed to a trusted colleague, hinting at a planned meeting with an anonymous source who claimed to have damning evidence against members of the Delgado family. The email ended abruptly with a line that read, "They are coming for me. If I don't get this out, no one will." The stark vulnerability in Marcus's words painted a picture of a man who had felt that the forces he was up against were not only vast but also deadly. The idea that Marcus had been silenced before he could reveal the full extent of the corruption, and that his murder might have been a calculated act by someone who wished to bury the truth, sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Detective Cortez then set her sights on the Delgado family. Cedar Grove, though small, was a town where history was deeply ingrained, and the Delgados were considered among the founding families. Public records and historical documents revealed that the family had once been one of the richest in the region, with investments in local businesses, politics, and real estate. Their influence was palpable in town meetings and in the corridors of power. When confronted, several members of the Delgado clan maintained a dignified silence, deflecting questions with polite but guarded responses. One older gentleman, who identified himself only as Mr. Delgado, remarked, "Some stories are best left in the past," his tone measured yet laced with an undercurrent of warning. As Detective Cortez delved deeper, she discovered that the Delgados had been involved in a series of questionable land deals during the 1980s, deals that coincided with the disappearances Marcus had been investigating. The timeline was disturbingly consistent. On the nights of the disappearances, records indicated that significant sums of money were transferred into a private account controlled by the family. The connection, while circumstantial, was enough to suggest that Marcus had uncovered evidence that could potentially rewrite the history of Cedar Grove, a truth that for those in power might have been worth killing for. One evening, while reviewing the case files in her temporary office at the Cedar Grove Police Department, Detective Cortez received an anonymous tip delivered in person, a plain envelope handed over by a nervous hooded figure. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper containing a faded photograph of a young woman in the 1980s, along with a cryptic note, "She knew too much." The photograph appeared to be of one of the missing individuals, her eyes wide with the innocence of youth, and the note hinted at a personal connection that had been deliberately concealed. The mystery deepened. Who was this woman, and what had she known about the Delgado family's dark history? Determined to follow every lead, Detective Cortez organized a series of interviews with older residents of Cedar Grove. In a cramped diner on the outskirts of town, she met with an elderly woman named Lillian Harris, who had lived in Cedar Grove all her life. Over cups of bitter coffee, Lillian recounted tales of whispered conversations and hushed warnings from decades past. There was talk long ago of a secret that the Delgados guarded with their lives, Lillian said softly. People who spoke of it often vanished, and those who tried to uncover the truth soon found themselves in danger. Lillian's recollections lent a somber, almost folkloric quality to the investigation, a reminder that some histories, however buried, leave scars that last through generations. As the investigation gathered momentum, digital forensic experts discovered additional evidence on Marcus's recovered hard drive. Among the files was a scanned copy of an old newspaper article from the 1980s that reported on a series of suspicious disappearances linked to a local real estate mogul. The article, though barely legible due to time's ravages, mentioned that the real estate tycoon had connections to the Delgado family, a detail that sent ripples through the case. Detective Cortez felt the weight of history pressing down on her. The past and present were converging in a way that made it clear that Marcus had been on the verge of exposing a decades-long conspiracy. Federal agents were eventually brought in to help piece together the financial trails that extended from the 1980s to the present day. Their investigations revealed a pattern of land deals, money transfers, and secretive meetings that spanned generations. It appeared that the Delgado family had not only enriched themselves through questionable practices, but had also maintained a tight grip on Cedar Grove's political and economic landscape by ensuring that any threat to their power was ruthlessly eliminated. The evidence suggested that Marcus's murder was part of that long continuum, a desperate act to silence a man who threatened to bring the past crashing into the present. As the case moved toward a critical phase, Detective Cortez and her team received another anonymous tip, this time a voicemail left on a secure phone line. The message was brief and unnervingly calm. In a town of secrets, some voices must be silenced for the greater good. The message, combined with the earlier threats, convinced Cortez that the forces behind the conspiracy were still active and were watching every move. Rather than fear, the threat steeled her resolve. "Every stone will be turned until we find the truth," she vowed, determination etched into every line of her face. In a daring move, the task force arranged a covert operation to gather surveillance footage from key locations associated with the Delgado family. Using a combination of public cameras and discreetly placed hidden devices, they captured images of several individuals, men and women in tailored suits and vintage clothing, entering a private estate on the outskirts of Cedar Grove. The estate, a sprawling mansion that had once been the heart of the Delgado legacy, was now shrouded in mystery. In one sequence of footage, an older man with a regal bearing, his face lined with the weight of years, emerged from a sleek black car. The man moved purposefully toward the mansion's imposing front doors, as if he were guarding a secret that had been passed down through generations. The images, though grainy, were enough to solidify the connection between the present-day disappearances of financial records and the long-buried scandals of the past. Armed with the weight of historical evidence, confidential testimonies, and the recovered digital files from Marcus Henderson's laptop, Detective Cortez prepared to present her findings to the grand jury. In a series of closed-door briefings, she outlined the full scope of the conspiracy, a network that connected decades of corruption, cover-ups, and disappearances in Cedar Grove to the high-handed practices of the Delgado family. The grand jury's decision to indict several individuals on charges, ranging from fraud and conspiracy to accessory to murder, sent shockwaves through the small town. The indictments, though not naming every individual responsible, confirmed that the investigation had unearthed a sprawling web of illicit activity that reached far beyond the boundaries of a single gas station or a single missing document. The trial itself was a long, grueling process that captivated the local media and the community at large. In a packed courtroom in downtown Cedar Grove, prosecutors laid out a narrative that wove together the evidence from the forensic details at the scene of Marcus's murder to the historical records of the Delgado family's dubious land deals. Expert witnesses testified about the financial discrepancies that Marcus had documented and the painstaking analysis of the digital files that revealed the underground network. In one dramatic moment, a forensic accountant explained how the systematic shortfall in the store's inventory, when extrapolated over the months, amounted to a sum so large that it could only have been the product of deliberate theft rather than accidental error. Witnesses from among former employees described a pervasive culture of intimidation within the corporation. I was warned in no uncertain terms that if I ever questioned the numbers, I'd end up like Marcus, one ex-auditor stated, voice quivering with the memory of threats. The courtroom was filled with a palpable tension as the community grappled with the realization that the very institutions they had trusted were built on a foundation of deceit and silenced truths. Despite the overwhelming evidence, not every question found an answer. Several of the senior members of the Delgado family managed to evade full accountability by invoking legal technicalities and maintaining a stoic silence. One such figure, an elder gentleman whose once commanding presence had defined the family for decades, was acquitted on a technicality, leaving many in the courtroom with a bitter sense of injustice. Even as mid-level managers and financial officers were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, the true architect of the cover-up remained an enigma, a ghost whose identity was obscured by redacted documents and hushed whispers that echoed through the corridors of power. In the months following the trial, Cedar Grove was forever changed. The legacy of Marcus Henderson's investigation and the tragic cost he paid for his pursuit of truth became a rallying point for reform. Local government officials, spurred by public outrage, enacted new laws to ensure transparency in corporate financial practices and to bolster protections for whistleblowers. Community leaders organized town hall meetings and public forums to discuss the implications of the case, and the story was widely covered in regional media, inspiring a renewed call for accountability. Detective Evelyn Cortez continued her work with a quiet but unyielding determination. Even after the indictments and the trial, she spent long nights poring over case files and reviewing every piece of evidence in meticulous detail. The memory of Marcus Henderson, the meticulous notes, the desperate final message, the determination in his eyes, remained a constant source of both pain and inspiration. In the quiet solitude of her office, as the soft hum of a ceiling fan mingled with the distant sounds of a town coming to terms with its past, she resolved to keep pushing for the truth, knowing that in a place like Cedar Grove, some secrets might never be fully laid to rest. One cold morning, as she walked along the main street lined with weathered storefronts and old familiar faces, Detective Cortez encountered a group of local activists gathered outside the town hall. They were discussing the recent reforms and the need for ongoing vigilance in the face of corruption. One activist, a determined young woman named Lisa, said, "Marcus's story has taught us that every number, every record, every piece of evidence matters. We can't allow the powerful to bury the truth, no matter how deep they dig." Her words, simple yet resolute, encapsulated the spirit that had driven the investigation from the very beginning. Though the trial had concluded and sentences were handed down, the case of Marcus Henderson and the tangled web of secrets that it had exposed remained an open wound in Cedar Grove's collective conscience. The unresolved mysteries, such as the true identity of the shadowy figure caught on surveillance, and the final, cryptic note delivered anonymously to Detective Cortez's office, continued to fuel debates among citizens and serve as a somber reminder that corruption could persist even in the wake of legal victories. In subsequent years, the case became a touchstone in discussions about corporate ethics and local governance. Academic seminars examined the methods by which financial fraud can infiltrate everyday institutions, and investigative journalists built upon Marcus's original work to shed light on similar patterns in other small towns. The story of a dedicated journalist who had dared to challenge the status quo became a legend, a cautionary tale of the high price that can be paid for seeking the truth. Detective Cortez, now a veteran with decades of experience behind her, often reflected on that humid summer night when everything changed at the last stop. She would visit the now renovated gas station periodically, where the neon sign still flickered, an unassuming reminder of a time when ordinary life was disrupted by extraordinary malice. In her quiet moments, she thought of Marcus's final notebook, his precise handwriting scrawled with warnings and predictions that no one had taken lightly until it was too late. She carried that memory as both a burden and a beacon, a call to continue fighting for justice, even when the paths were murky and the outcomes uncertain. The case, with its layers of deception, violence, and unresolved questions, did not end with a tidy conclusion. Instead, it was an evolving narrative, a mosaic of victories, tragedies, and lingering mysteries that served as a constant challenge to every authority in Cedar Grove. The community, having been forced to confront its own vulnerabilities, began to demand transparency and accountability from both its corporate and political leaders. New regulations were introduced to ensure that discrepancies in financial records could no longer be ignored, and whistleblower protections were strengthened to encourage employees to come forward without fear of retribution. As Cedar Grove slowly moved forward, the echoes of that fateful investigation remained ever present. In the quiet murmur of local diners, in the low conversations at town meetings, and in the cautious optimism of a community determined to learn from its past, Marcus Henderson's legacy lived on. His unwavering pursuit of the truth, though cut short, had sparked a movement, a realization that the courage to question, to document, and to hold those in power accountable was a powerful force that could transform even the smallest town. Detective Evelyn Cortez continued to patrol the streets and oversee new cases with the same tenacity that had defined the investigation. Though many of the conspirators had been brought to justice, she knew that corruption was a moving target, an ever-shifting web that could resurface in unexpected ways. Each time a new discrepancy was discovered in a routine report or a new anonymous tip was received, she was reminded that the fight for transparency was never truly over. In a final, understated twist that underscored the lingering uncertainty of the case, Detective Cortez received an unmarked envelope one morning at the precinct. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing a handwritten note: "The past never truly dies." There was no signature, no explanation, only the haunting implication that the network Marcus had exposed might still have dormant tendrils reaching into the present. Rather than signaling an immediate threat, the note was a somber reminder of the enduring nature of secrets and the continuous effort required to bring them into the light. And so, as the sun rose over Cedar Grove and the familiar rhythm of small-town life resumed, the story of Marcus Henderson remained woven into the fabric of the community, a narrative of quiet bravery and the perilous cost of uncovering uncomfortable truths. The case was not a neatly resolved chapter, but an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, a living testament to the idea that the pursuit of justice, though fraught with danger and uncertainty, is a commitment that must endure as long as people are willing to speak out against wrongdoing. In the end, the legacy of that investigation was measured not solely by the convictions secured in courtrooms or by the headlines that briefly captured the public's attention, but by the transformation it inspired in a community determined to protect its future. Every time a new regulation was enacted, every policy reviewed with fresh scrutiny, the memory of Marcus's courage shone through. His meticulous notes, his final warnings, and his steadfast determination to expose the truth became an enduring beacon for those who believed that no secret, however deeply hidden, should be allowed to fester unchecked. Detective Evelyn Cortez continued her work with a quiet resolve, fully aware that the corridors of power are often dark and labyrinthine. And while many in Cedar Grove found solace in the new safeguards and heightened vigilance, there was always a lingering sense that the quest for truth was an endless journey, a journey marked by small victories, profound losses, and the unyielding hope that every uncovered secret might one day lead to a fairer, more transparent world. Under the fading light of a late summer evening in San Francisco, a sense of routine reigned over the busy streets of Fisherman's Wharf. Tourists ambled along the piers and locals strolled past street vendors, all immersed in the familiar hum of city life. At the heart of this vibrant scene stood an unassuming multi-level parking garage tucked away behind a row of historic buildings. For years it had served as nothing more than a utilitarian shelter for vehicles, a transient repository, hidden in plain sight. But on this particular night, a grim discovery in that very structure would shatter the calm and send ripples of shock throughout the city. In one of the lower levels of the garage, where harsh fluorescent lights battled against deep shadows, an off-duty security guard named Ramon Vega was making his customary rounds. As he walked the narrow corridors lined with concrete pillars and weathered parking bays, Ramon's practiced eyes caught something unusual. Near a locked service door, he discovered a body sprawled on the cold, stained floor. The man, later identified as Anthony Tony Morales, a 34-year-old freelance photographer, known for his keen eye and quiet demeanor, lay motionless, his features twisted in a final silent expression of terror. Clutched in his hand was a scrap of paper bearing a hastily scrawled message: "No secret remains buried." Ramon's heart pounded as he fumbled for his radio, his voice barely concealing his shock. Within minutes, uniformed officers swarmed the area, and soon the garage was cordoned off with bright crime scene tape that fluttered in the cool night breeze. Detective Laura Kim, a veteran investigator with the San Francisco Police Department, arrived shortly thereafter. Known for her meticulous attention to detail and an intuition honed by years of experience in complex cases, Kim surveyed the scene with a measured gaze. There was something almost ritualistic about the positioning of Tony Morales's body. There was no evidence of a struggle, no sign of forced entry. The stark simplicity of the note in his grasp suggested that this was not a random act, but a deliberate message sent to silence a truth. In the ensuing hours, Detective Kim began to piece together the events that led up to Tony's untimely end. Interviews with the handful of employees who worked in the garage that night revealed fragmented accounts. One attendant recalled that Tony had been unusually restless in the days prior. He'd lingered after his shifts, quietly checking the security monitors in a back office, his expression grave and distant. A fellow guard mentioned that Tony had even remarked in passing, "Some things in this city aren't meant to be seen," though he had quickly brushed off the comment as offhand banter. Yet now, as the investigation unfolded, those words took on an ominous quality. At Tony Morales's modest apartment in the Mission District, investigators discovered a small collection of personal belongings that shed light on his life beyond his photography. Among his cherished possessions was a worn leather camera case and a journal filled with meticulous notes, sketches, and fragmented thoughts. One page, written in clear, deliberate script, detailed his recent investigation into a series of unsolved disappearances around the waterfront. Tony had been following a trail that linked obscure financial transactions, hush-hush land deals, and a mysterious local family that had once wielded considerable influence in San Francisco's underworld. His words hinted at a deep-seated suspicion: when shadows dance on the water, some truths must be hidden, until someone dares to shine a light. The detective pored over Tony's journal late into the night, the dim glow of her desk lamp illuminating passages that revealed a side of the city few cared to acknowledge. Tony had been tracking a series of irregularities involving real estate transfers in the Wharf area, transactions that had been glossed over by official records but which he believed concealed a darker story of exploitation and cover-up. He noted strange meetings at waterfront restaurants, hushed conversations between powerful figures, and even a series of anonymous warnings he'd received via email. Each entry was laced with an undercurrent of foreboding, a sense that his investigation was unearthing secrets that powerful individuals would kill to keep hidden. As Detective Kim expanded her inquiry, she interviewed Tony's friends and colleagues from the local photography community. Many recalled Tony as a reserved but passionate man, someone who preferred the quiet intimacy of candid street photography to the flash of celebrity events. One close friend, Elena Martinez, revealed that Tony had recently grown anxious and withdrawn, mentioning cryptic phrases like "they're watching" and "the walls have ears." Elena's recollections painted a picture of a man emboldened by the pursuit of a story, yet increasingly aware that his probing might have dangerous consequences. Parallel to these personal accounts, forensic teams worked methodically in the parking garage. They collected samples of trace evidence, small flecks of soil that seemed out of place on the concrete, a fragment of a broken plastic tool, and a set of fingerprints on the scrap of paper held by Tony. Digital experts, meanwhile, recovered deleted files from one of the security monitors, revealing that on the night in question, a figure in a dark jacket had been seen moving purposefully through the lower levels of the garage. Although the video was grainy, the individual's deliberate gait and the way he glided between shadows suggested that he was no ordinary passerby. His presence had been recorded only fleetingly, but it was enough to send Detective Kim's mind racing with possibilities. Her investigation then shifted to the heart of the matter, the real estate transactions that Tony had been examining. Public records from San Francisco's county clerk revealed that over the past 18 months, several properties near Fisherman's Wharf had changed hands under suspicious circumstances. The sales prices were inexplicably lower than market value, and the transactions were handled by a single real estate firm, Delgado and Sons, a family-owned business with a long and storied history in the city. Delgado and Sons had been a pillar of the community, known for its philanthropic contributions and its tight-knit connections to local politics. Yet Tony's notes suggested that behind their polished exterior lay a legacy of exploitation, a series of land deals that had stripped longtime residents of their rights and enriched a select few. Detective Kim arranged a meeting with a retired real estate broker, Mr. Samuel Green, who had worked in the wharf area for over 30 years. In a cramped office above a busy diner, Samuel recounted the dramatic changes that had swept through the neighborhood. There was a time when every sale was transparent, he said, leaning forward as if to confide a secret. But then one day, the prices started dropping too steeply, too fast. It wasn't market forces, it was something else. I heard whispers that the Delgado family was behind it, using every trick in the book to get properties at bargain rates and then flipping them for a fortune. Samuel's voice wavered with a mix of nostalgia and regret, and his words provided a tangible link to the anomalies Tony had documented. As the financial trails were unraveled, a new, unsettling twist emerged. Digital forensics specialists uncovered a series of encrypted emails on a server linked to Delgado and Sons. One message, painstakingly decrypted by experts, contained a chilling directive: ensure that no evidence surfaces. The legacy must remain intact. The email was unsigned and stripped of context, yet its implications were profound. It hinted at a deliberate effort by the Delgado family to maintain a stranglehold on the area, a grip enforced not only through financial manipulation but potentially through coercion, and as Detective Kim feared, even violence. Detective Kim began to suspect that Tony's murder was intricately linked to the Delgado family's operation, a conspiracy that spanned generations. In the days that followed, she focused on a series of interviews with current and former employees of Delgado and Sons. Many spoke of a family that was both revered and feared. One longtime employee recalled that a few years prior, a property developer who had dared to question the family's methods had suddenly disappeared, never to be heard from again. It was like they had a way of making problems vanish, the employee confided. They say the Delgados know how to protect their interests, by any means necessary. The testimony, though anecdotal, added a layer of grim credibility to the notion that Tony's relentless investigation had roused dangerous adversaries. Meanwhile, federal agents joined the local task force to investigate the financial discrepancies and the suspicious real estate transactions. Their extensive audit of Delgado and Sons records confirmed that millions of dollars had been funneled through a series of shell companies, disguising the true nature of the land deals. The forensic accountants detailed how the sums, though small in individual transactions, accumulated over time into a vast pool of illicit profits that could only be explained by deliberate theft and exploitation. The agents also discovered that the timing of several of these transactions corresponded with dates noted in Tony's journal, lending further credence to his findings. Detective Kim's team then turned its attention back to the parking garage where Tony's body had been discovered. A painstaking re-examination of the security footage, using advanced video enhancement techniques, finally produced a clearer image of the shadowy figure seen earlier that night. The man was captured briefly near a service door, his face partially visible, a mixture of determination and cold detachment etched on his features. With the help of a facial recognition specialist, the image was compared against a database of known local individuals. Although the match was not conclusive, it did suggest a possible link to a man who had been associated with Delgado and Sons in the past, a low-level operative whose role was to handle situations discreetly. As Detective Kim compiled her findings, the pressure on the investigation intensified. The evidence now pointed to a network of corruption that not only involved the misappropriation of funds and dubious real estate transactions, but also hinted at a history of disappearances and threats dating back decades. Tony Morales had been the latest in a series of individuals who had tried to expose this legacy, a man whose meticulous work had cut through layers of deceit, only to be silenced in a cold, calculated act of violence. In a climactic series of raids coordinated by federal authorities, several offices associated with Delgado and Sons were searched. Hidden safes were found behind false walls in an aging building near the waterfront. Inside, investigators uncovered stacks of confidential documents, bank statements, and encrypted files detailing the inner workings of the family's financial empire. One folder, in particular, contained a ledger that meticulously tracked every instance of underreported property sales and every discrete transfer of money. The ledger, its entries handwritten in a flowing script, was a damning piece of evidence that corroborated Tony's final investigations. The names of several key figures, though redacted in public records, emerged in internal memos as responsible for ensuring that the legacy remained untouched. During subsequent interrogations, several mid-level managers from Delgado and Sons reluctantly admitted that they had been aware of irregularities in the land deals. One nervous manager tearfully confessed that when he had raised concerns, he was warned that some voices never get a second chance. His testimony, delivered in a quavering tone, provided a rare glimpse into the culture of fear that permeated the organization. The trial that followed became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Cedar Grove's modern history. In a packed courtroom in downtown San Francisco, federal prosecutors presented the comprehensive evidence amassed over months of tireless investigation. Expert witnesses, including forensic accountants and digital analysts, detailed the systematic diversion of funds and the intricate web of shell companies that had been used to disguise the true nature of the transactions. The prosecution argued that Tony Morales's murder was not a spur-of-the-moment act, but a premeditated operation orchestrated by powerful figures intent on preserving a corrupt legacy. His unwavering dedication to exposing the truth, as evidenced by his journal and recovered communications, had ultimately made him a target. Testimony from former employees of Delgado and Sons, combined with the recovered ledger and internal memos, painted a damning portrait of a family that had used its influence to manipulate local politics, real estate, and even law enforcement. One witness, a retired auditor, recalled with emotion how he had been pressured to adjust the books without questioning the rationale behind the changes. His voice, thick with regret, underscored the pervasive nature of the cover-up, a practice so deeply entrenched that speaking out was tantamount to inviting retribution. The defense, for its part, argued that the irregularities were the result of outdated accounting practices and that any discrepancies were unintentional errors in a complex corporate structure. They maintained that Tony's work, while diligent, had been overly suspicious and that his murder might have been the tragic result of a random act of violence in a city where such incidents, though rare, were not unheard of. However, as the layers of evidence unfolded, a combination of hard digital data, compelling physical evidence, and poignant personal testimonies, the jury found the case overwhelmingly convincing. In a verdict that sent shockwaves through both the corporate and legal communities, several mid-level managers and financial officers were convicted of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. The convictions, though hard-fought, were seen by many as only a partial victory. The senior figures at Delgado and Sons, shielded by layers of legal complexity and the power of the family's legacy, managed to avoid the most severe punishments, leaving a lingering question about whether justice had been fully served. After the trial, the public response in San Francisco was a mix of relief, outrage, and a newfound demand for accountability. Community activists and local politicians used the case as a catalyst to push for stricter oversight of corporate practices and stronger protections for those who dared to expose corruption. Public forums were held in which citizens debated the ethics of real estate dealings, the importance of transparency in business, and the need for legal reforms that would ensure no one could operate above the law. The legacy of Tony Morales's work, tragic as it was, became a rallying cry for those determined to prevent similar abuses in the future. Detective Laura Kim continued to work on related cases, her every new investigation colored by the lessons learned from Tony's untimely death. Though the case had yielded significant reforms and brought some of the lower-level conspirators to justice, the deeper layers of corruption hinted at by the anonymous messages and the hidden ledger remained a sobering reminder that the pursuit of truth was an ongoing battle. Late at night, in the quiet solitude of her office overlooking the city's skyline, she would reread Tony's final journal entries, the words etched in his handwriting serving as both a testament to his courage and a challenge to those who would let secrets fester. There was no triumphant finale, a clean, complete unmasking of every dark force at work. Instead, the case of Tony Morales and the tangled web of illicit real estate deals remained an evolving narrative, a complex mosaic of revealed truths and lingering mysteries. The unidentified figure caught on surveillance in the parking garage, a man whose face remained blurred by shadows, continued to haunt Detective Kim's thoughts, as did the cryptic warnings delivered anonymously to her office. Though the trial had brought many guilty parties to justice, the overarching network behind the cover-up was too vast, its upper echelons elusive and shrouded in layers of redacted documentation. In the months and years that followed, the story of Tony Morales became part of local lore, a cautionary tale recounted in hushed tones at community meetings, in discussions among reform-minded activists, and in academic seminars on corporate ethics. The case spurred significant changes in regulatory oversight across the region, and the legacy of his diligent pursuit of the truth inspired new initiatives to protect whistleblowers and ensure that discrepancies in financial records could be more readily detected. In a city renowned for its resilience and its ceaseless pursuit of justice, the memory of one man's unwavering commitment to integrity lived on. Detective Kim's own career was indelibly shaped by the case. Each day, as she patrolled the streets of San Francisco, through neighborhoods of old brick buildings and modern glass towers alike, she carried with her the weight of a story that was far from over. The investigation had taught her that truth is not a static prize but a living, breathing challenge, one that demands constant vigilance and the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Even in the midst of a city celebrated for its openness and innovation, dark currents could flow beneath the surface, waiting for someone to expose them. There were days when the lingering questions, the identity of that shadowy figure, the full extent of the Delgado family's involvement, and the subtle ties to an underground network would seem to haunt her, casting long shadows over her accomplishments. Yet in those moments, she recalled Tony Morales's words in his final journal entry and found the resolve to push onward. His meticulous records, his unyielding search for a story that could change the world, were a reminder that even when faced with overwhelming obstacles, the quest for accountability was worth every risk. As San Francisco continued its perpetual rhythm, its foggy mornings, sunlit afternoons, and neon-lit nights, the case of Tony Morales was woven into the fabric of the city's history. It was a narrative of quiet bravery amid systemic corruption, of a single voice that dared to challenge powerful interests, and of the enduring impact that one determined individual can have on the world. While the legal battles had delivered partial justice and corporate reforms had been enacted in the aftermath, the case remained an open wound, a reminder that in a society where secrets are currency and silence is enforced with ruthless precision, the fight for truth is a never-ending journey. In time, local media revisited the case in a series of investigative reports that explored its long-term impact on corporate oversight and community activism. Lawmakers cited the case as a pivotal moment that spurred new legislation, and academic journals published articles analyzing the mechanisms of financial fraud and the psychology of corruption. Tony Morales's story became a touchstone, a symbol of the sacrifices made by those who choose to shine light into the darkest corners of power. For Detective Laura Kim, each new case was approached with the careful scrutiny and determination that had defined her work on Tony's investigation. She knew that while some mysteries might never be fully resolved, every step taken toward uncovering hidden truths was a victory in its own right. And in the ever-changing landscape of San Francisco, a city that balanced the old with the new, the visible with the hidden, her efforts served as a steadfast reminder that the pursuit of justice is an ongoing mission, a commitment that must endure even in the face of overwhelming adversity. As the years passed, the echoes of that humid summer night in the parking garage continued to resonate. In the quiet corners of a bustling city, in the careful adjustments of new financial regulations, and in the brave voices of whistleblowers and reformers, the legacy of Tony Morales lived on, a powerful narrative of integrity, perseverance, and the unyielding quest to ensure that no secret, however deeply buried, would ever remain hidden forever. The constant murmur of crowds, the clatter of rolling suitcases, and the occasional sound of a distant train horn created an ever-present background in the bustling transit hub. Every day, thousands of commuters passed through the vast, echoing halls of the station, a major nexus for travelers heading in every direction. For most, it was a passageway between destinations, a brief pause in a hectic journey. But one chilly autumn evening, the rhythm of routine was shattered by an event so unexpected that it would cast a long shadow over every life connected to that place. It started when a maintenance worker, who had long grown accustomed to the hum of fluorescent lights and the sharp scent of industrial cleaners, discovered something out of the ordinary in a secluded maintenance corridor tucked away behind a cluster of rarely used platforms. As he made his regular rounds, checking the integrity of the electrical panels and ensuring that emergency exits were unimpeded, he noticed a body lying in unnatural stillness near a service door. The man's face, contorted in a silent, frozen expression, bore the marks of a sudden and violent end. There was no obvious sign of struggle, no scattered debris or overturned equipment, only a single scrap of paper clutched tightly in his hand, its ink smeared by dried blood. The message, barely legible, read, "Some stories must stay untold." Within minutes, uniformed officers converged on the scene. The vast concourse of the transit hub, usually alive with chatter and hurried footsteps, fell into an eerie silence as the area was cordoned off. Detective Olivia Marshall, known for her relentless pursuit of detail and calm under pressure, arrived shortly after. Stepping into the dim corridor where the body was found, she absorbed every nuance, the deliberate placement of the victim, the almost clinical lack of disorder, and the unsettling calm that belied the violence of the act. It was as if the perpetrator had staged the scene with a specific intent to silence a man whose investigation had threatened to upend a carefully constructed facade. The victim was later identified as James Carter, a 36-year-old commuter who was known among his colleagues for his quiet reliability. A graphic designer by day, James had a side passion for investigative photography, capturing candid moments around the city's lesser-known corners. His work, usually personal and intimate, had recently taken on a more serious tone. In the months before his death, James had been seen scribbling notes in a battered notebook during his commute and engaging in hushed phone calls in isolated corners of the station. Colleagues described him as meticulous and deeply curious, a man who wasn't content with the everyday narrative, but instead sought out the hidden stories beneath the surface of public life. Detective Marshall began her inquiry by retracing James's final hours. Through interviews with fellow commuters and staff, she learned that on the night in question, James had taken a detour from his usual route. Instead of heading straight to the platform for his scheduled train, he had lingered near an abandoned maintenance stairwell. A janitor recalled that, during his late shift, he had seen James conversing quietly with a station employee, someone whose face he couldn't quite make out in the dim light. Another witness, a homeless man who often sheltered in the station's corners, mentioned that he had observed a figure in a dark coat pacing near one of the locked doors just before a sudden commotion disrupted the area. At the heart of the investigation was a small worn leather notebook recovered from James's belongings at his modest apartment. The journal was filled with neatly penciled entries detailing his observations of the station. Initial entries were innocuous notes about the daily rhythm, the timing of arrivals and departures, snippets of overheard conversations, and brief sketches of the station's architecture. However, as the pages turned, a more disturbing pattern emerged. James had noted subtle inconsistencies in the station's internal records. One page read, "Shifts in the security logs don't match the actual movements, something is being covered up." Another entry described unusual activity in the maintenance corridors, specifically, a series of unexplained absences of equipment and stock supplies. His final hastily written note, dated just days before his death, warned, "If I follow these numbers too far, they'll silence more than just me." Digital forensics experts managed to recover deleted emails from James's work laptop, an aging device he had often used during his off hours in the station's back rooms. Among these was a cryptic message sent from an untraceable account: "Don't pry too far, or you will vanish." The terse warning, combined with the physical evidence at the scene, convinced Detective Marshall that James's death was not a random act of violence, but the result of a deliberate operation to keep certain secrets buried. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Marshall expanded her focus beyond the immediate vicinity of the maintenance corridor. She interviewed station employees, including a security guard who recalled that on several occasions in recent weeks, a well-dressed individual had been seen entering restricted areas. This man, described as calm, methodical, and unafraid, was often spotted near the service entrances and on stairwells usually off-limits to the public. Although his face was rarely captured clearly by the security cameras, a few grainy images suggested that he was not a typical employee, but someone with a level of access that could only be granted to a trusted insider. Further inquiries led Marshall to the station's administrative office, where internal documents regarding maintenance schedules and budget reports were kept. A forensic accountant reviewing these records discovered that several routine purchases for the station's upkeep were inexplicably missing from the financial statements. In particular, there were consistent discrepancies in the ordering of replacement parts for critical equipment, parts that were noted as short in the physical inventory, but never accounted for in the digital logs. The sum total of these missing items, while small on any individual day, added up over months to an amount that could finance unauthorized projects, or perhaps more ominously, serve as bribes. The discovery of these irregularities hinted at a cover-up, a clandestine operation that may have reached into the station's upper management. Detective Marshall's investigation took a darker turn when she interviewed a former station supervisor who had been forced to resign under mysterious circumstances. The ex-supervisor, speaking in a hushed voice at a local diner, recalled that management had grown increasingly secretive over the past year. "I remember they started talking about protecting our assets and maintaining the balance, phrases that sounded more like orders than routine adjustments," he said. "There were rumors that anyone who questioned the numbers would end up disappearing. I never thought I'd see it happen here, but now I know someone was determined to stop one man from exposing too much." His testimony, though veiled in half-truths, lent further credibility to the theory that James's investigation had struck a nerve. At the same time, digital trail analysis revealed that a particular series of transactions, small transfers recorded in the station's financial system, had been funneled to an unknown account registered in a foreign country known for lax financial oversight. The transfers, occurring with regularity over a span of several months, were disguised under innocuous labels such as routine adjustments and maintenance reserves. When aggregated, they represented a significant diversion of funds, one that could only be the work of someone with access to high-level accounting systems. Detective Marshall began to suspect that the financial discrepancies were not simply an internal error, but were being orchestrated as part of a larger scheme, one designed to siphon resources away from the station's legitimate operations and into an underground network. In a series of late-night meetings, Marshall and her team pieced together more details about the suspicious transactions. They learned that several station employees, when pressed about the missing funds, provided inconsistent stories. One maintenance worker confessed that he had been instructed to adjust the figures in the system without explaining why. Another, a part-time cashier, mentioned that he had once seen a supervisor using a keycard to access a locked file cabinet that contained confidential financial reports. These fragmented testimonies, though each individually inconclusive, began to form a coherent picture of an operation where those in power were willing to bend and even break the rules to secure their illicit gains. Amid mounting evidence, an anonymous tip finally came through that seemed to tie many of the disparate elements together. A single letter, delivered to Detective Marshall's office without return address, contained several pages of handwritten notes and copies of internal memos. The note spoke of an operation to safeguard secrets, and mentioned that if the numbers ever aligned, they would reveal a web of betrayal that could destroy lives. Although the letter was unsigned, forensic handwriting experts later confirmed that certain stylistic elements were consistent with those found in a notebook kept by one of the station's longtime administrators, a person whose identity had long been shrouded in mystery among the employees. The letter hinted that the orchestrators of the cover-up were aware that their scheme was unraveling and were prepared to take drastic measures to prevent its exposure. With the weight of this evidence, Detective Marshall arranged to bring together several key witnesses for a coordinated interrogation session. In a secure conference room set up in an unassuming municipal building, she questioned a group of former and current employees who had been implicated by the financial records and internal memos. One by one, they recounted their experiences of a culture that prized silence above transparency. "We were all told that questioning the numbers was dangerous," one employee admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were meetings where the language used was clinical, almost robotic, talking about balancing the books and eliminating discrepancies as if it were a routine procedure." Their collective testimony painted a disturbing portrait of an environment where fear was weaponized, and where a single inquisitive mind could disrupt an entire system. Federal agents were eventually called in to join the investigation. Working in tandem with local officers, they conducted a comprehensive audit of the station's financial systems. The results confirmed that over a period of 8 months, thousands of dollars had been stealthily siphoned from the operating budget. The forensic accountant on the team demonstrated that the pattern of transfers was too systematic to be coincidental. It was the unmistakable signature of a deliberate cover-up. When questioned, several mid-level managers admitted that they had been pressured into approving these transfers without proper oversight, citing vague directives that spoke of maintaining operational integrity, but were in fact designed to hide the misappropriation. As the investigation reached a fever pitch, the focus shifted toward a mysterious individual who had been seen on surveillance footage near the maintenance corridor. Although his features were obscured by shadows, forensic analysis of the video suggested that he was a man of average build with a calm, methodical gait. Using facial recognition software and cross-referencing employee records, Detective Marshall narrowed down the list of potential suspects. Eventually, a name emerged: a recently terminated supervisor who had vanished from the station's records under unexplained circumstances. When confronted with this new lead, several witnesses recalled seeing him in the vicinity of restricted areas, moving with purpose as if he were covering his tracks. His involvement, they hinted, was part of a broader effort to ensure that any inquiry into the discrepancies would be met with resistance. In a daring midnight operation, officers secured a warrant to search the former supervisor's last known residence, a modest apartment on the outskirts of the transit hub. Inside, amidst stacks of discarded paperwork and personal effects, they found a computer containing several encrypted files. With the assistance of cyber forensic experts, these files were decrypted to reveal internal emails, confidential memos, and even voice recordings that detailed instructions on how to balance the books by redirecting funds. The language was cold, calculated, and devoid of any emotion. The files provided a damning trail of evidence that linked the terminated supervisor to the clandestine operation, and by extension to the culture of intimidation that had claimed Marcus's life. As the case built toward a climax, Detective Marshall compiled her extensive findings into a comprehensive report that detailed every facet of the cover-up. The report was presented to a grand jury, which eventually returned indictments against several mid-level executives and financial managers associated with the station. The charges ranged from fraud and conspiracy to accessory to murder, as it became clear that Marcus's death was a calculated attempt to silence a man who threatened to expose a deeply entrenched network of corruption. Although the trial that followed was long and contentious, the evidence was overwhelming. Expert witnesses took the stand, explaining how minor discrepancies, when aggregated over time, could indicate systematic theft. Former employees testified under protective measures, their accounts corroborating the internal memos and the digital records recovered from Marcus's notebook. In the courtroom, the narrative unfolded with chilling clarity. The prosecution laid out the sequence of events, detailing how a diligent employee had uncovered irregularities, and how his determination to document the truth had ruffled the feathers of those in positions of power. The anonymous threats, the recovered ledger entries, and the surveillance footage all converged to form a picture of a cover-up that extended far beyond petty theft. While several of the accused were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms, a lingering sense of injustice remained. The upper echelons of the organization, those who had orchestrated the scheme from behind layers of corporate bureaucracy, managed to avoid full accountability through legal maneuvering and technicalities. Their names were redacted from many of the public documents, leaving behind a mystery that few could resolve. The trial's conclusion did little to restore normalcy in the community. Fresh displays were installed in the store, security protocols were overhauled, and regulators implemented stricter oversight measures. Yet, the memory of that night, the quiet, methodical discovery of a body in a dimly lit corridor, the cryptic note clutched in trembling hands, and the relentless determination of a man who sought to expose the hidden truths, lingered like a specter. The case had become a symbol of the high cost of questioning the status quo, a reminder that even in places where everyday routines provide comfort and familiarity, darkness can seep in through the cracks of routine oversight. In the months and years that followed, the investigation into the discrepancies at Fresh Harvest Market and its parent company led to further scrutiny of similar practices across the region. The case inspired local journalists to dig deeper into corporate financial practices, and public watchdog groups sprang up, demanding greater transparency and accountability from businesses that operated within the community. Town hall meetings were held, where residents debated the ethics of unchecked corporate power, and new legislation was proposed to protect those who spoke out against financial mismanagement. The ripple effects of the investigation reached far beyond the confines of a single grocery store, igniting a broader conversation about integrity, transparency, and the right of citizens to demand honest governance. Detective Olivia Marshall, who had spearheaded the investigation from the moment of discovery, found that her work had changed her profoundly. Each day, as she walked the familiar corridors of her precinct, she recalled the meticulous notes in Marcus's notebook and the chilling anonymity of the threats he had received. Though she had achieved justice in part by securing convictions for several individuals, she understood that the true battle against corruption was ongoing, a continuous effort to scrutinize every number, every transaction, every whispered secret in the corridors of power. One early winter morning, as a gentle fog enveloped the quiet streets and the station's lights glowed dimly in the distance, Detective Marshall received a final envelope at her office. It was unmarked and contained a single typed message: "The past never fades, some chapters remain unwritten." There was no signature, no explanation, only the lingering sense that despite all the progress made, the labyrinth of deceit that had claimed Marcus's life might still be active in unseen corners. That final message, ambiguous and haunting, steeled her resolve to keep fighting, to remain ever vigilant in a world where every overlooked detail could be the key to exposing a deeper truth. In the years following the trial, the story of Marcus Delgado and the intricate network of theft, intimidation, and cover-up he had uncovered became a touchstone for the community. It was discussed in local universities and mentioned in the corridors of regulatory agencies as a case study of how small discrepancies, if left unchecked, could evolve into something far more sinister. The legacy of a man who had dared to challenge the established order was honored through new policies, increased oversight, and a renewed public commitment to accountability. For many, the case served as a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, whether in the bright aisles of a familiar market, the quiet corridors of a transit hub, or the unassuming backrooms of a workplace, there are hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. The memory of that humid summer night, when the steady pulse of routine was broken by a single unanswerable question, lingered as a call to action for those who believed that silence should never be the price of integrity. Detective Marshall continued her career with an unwavering commitment to uncovering those hidden stories, knowing that each new case was part of an endless tapestry of human ambition, betrayal, and the struggle for justice. And while some mysteries might remain forever shrouded in darkness, she held fast to the conviction that every uncovered secret, every painstakingly recorded detail, was a step toward building a more transparent world. In the interplay between light and shadow across that bustling transit hub, amid the echoes of hurried footsteps and the distant hum of arriving trains, the legacy of Marcus Delgado's relentless pursuit of truth endured. It was not a neatly wrapped conclusion, nor was it a story with a definitive end. It was a living, breathing narrative that continued to influence policies, inspire new investigations, and remind a community that the fight for integrity is an ongoing journey. Every day, as the station filled with the sound of voices and the clatter of luggage, the memory of that fateful night was interwoven with the rhythm of everyday life, a subtle, persistent reminder that even in the midst of routine, darkness can hide in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to expose it. And so, in a world that never truly sleeps, where every corridor may harbor a secret and every ordinary moment holds the potential for extraordinary revelations, the quest for truth goes on, an endless determined pursuit that, despite its many costs, remains the very foundation of a just society.